Are you watching closely?
This opening line to Christopher Nolan's underrated 2006 film The Prestige is one of the best that I've ever heard. For those that haven't seen the movie, this question over top a series of identical hats may seem innocuous, perhaps even boring. But for those who have seen it, they know that this moment is foreshadowing the entire rest of the film. The screenplay expertly balances this by using misdirection to hide the seemingly convoluted twist in plain sight. How appropriate for a movie about magicians. This opening scene isn't the only early notion that the audience is given towards the final resolution of the film's mystery. In fact, much of the movie is revealed within the fabled first 10 pages, a phrase that most screenwriters will be very familiar with. While the first 10 minutes of a movie are important for hooking the audience, it's these pages that are, allegedly, all that a producer will read before deciding whether or not to pass on the script. These statements create some curiosity, as the favorite or most iconic scene of a movie is rarely within these pages. As such, I wanted to take a look at one of my favorite movies and see just how impactful the opening sequences of the screenplay were in setting up and revealing the rest of the film. It's not an opinion, it's barely an analysis, it's just the first 10 pages. To understand the importance of the following pages, let's do a quick rundown of the film. As per Nolan's MO, the story is told out of order, so I will summarize it in chronological order. The Prestige takes place in turn-of-the-century England and centers around two rival magicians, Alfred Borden and Robert Angier. After a trick goes wrong, killing his wife Julia, Angier seeks revenge against Borden and shoots off two of his fingers. Borden begins a romance with a woman named Sarah, eventually giving birth to their daughter Jess. He also hires an ingénieur named Fallon. Cutter offers his own services as an ingénieur to Angier, and they hire an assistant named Olivia. They are sabotaged on stage by Borden. Angier sneaks into Borden's show and witnesses
It was the greatest magic trick I've ever seen.
Borden walks into one closet on stage and appears out of another. Despite Cutter's insistence that Borden uses a double, Angier is convinced that the truth is far more complex.
You only say that because you don't know the method.
Using his own double, Angier steals the trick to improve on it and rises to fame. Because they switch after Angier's showmanship, he has to take his bows beneath the stage, a fact that he resents. He sends Olivia to steal Borden's secrets, but she falls in love with Borden and sabotages Angier on stage again. She steals Borden's encoded diary and gives it to Angier. Using Fallon as bait, he coerces Borden into giving up the keyword. This leads Angier to Colorado, seeking the help of Nikola Tesla. Eventually, a machine is built that can clone and transport people simultaneously. Despite learning that Borden's diary is a red herring for Angier to chase, he's acquired the tool that will allow him to beat Borden. Borden, meanwhile, begins an affair with Olivia, becoming distant from his wife Sarah. She eventually figures out the truth
I know what you really are, Alfred.
and discovers that he cares more about magic than her, so she hangs herself. Borden's callousness towards this causes Olivia to dump him, but not without revealing Angier's return. After seeing the real transported man, Borden, for once, seeks to learn Angier's methods. He ventures backstage to expose him, but Angier drowns in a tank of water, with Borden arrested for his murder. Jess is taken away from Fallon's custody and placed in the care of Lord Caldlow, who reveals himself to be Angier, back from the dead. Cutter tries to destroy the machine, learns about Caldlow himself, and is horrified by his own involvement. After a tearful goodbye with Fallon, Borden is hung. Angier puts the machine into storage, wherein he is shot by Borden, back from the dead. All secrets are now revealed. Borden was a twin, who had also disguised himself as Fallon and swapped as needed. Angier reveals the machine's ability and that the water tank he uses in his show was to ensure there wasn't a copy of him running around. Angier dies, and Borden returns to Cutter's workshop to pick up Jess so they can live happily ever after. The screenplay begins having Borden talk over a cluster of identical top hats. As we'll later learn, these top hats are not mass-produced, but the same hat cloned again and again from Tesla's machine.
Well, which one is mine?
They're all your heads, Mr. Angier.
This image, in just the first 5 lines of the screenplay, already tells us that pairs, sets, and duplicates are going to be a key motif throughout the film. I also think that there's a duality in the implication of the word double, as in double life. With the chief characters being magicians, they're rarely, if ever, upfront about their intentions.
You have a circle of trust with someone whose diary you stole?
The next 4 pages intercut between 2 scenes, with Cutter's narration about the 3 stages of a magic trick over top. The first scene shows Cutter in a workshop, passing by a series of identical-looking birds. He takes one out of the cage and presents it to a little girl, who we will later learn is Jess, Borden's daughter. It's interesting to note that Cutter is removing it from its cage. And while bird in the cage symbolism is nothing new, this could be a subtle nod that he's trying to free himself over some guilt. That said, for those that are familiar with the trick he's about to perform, we also know what gruesome fate awaits our feathered friend. Thus, we can conclude that he is going to be complicit in some other crime. In fact, even though it's the second scene, it actually takes place closer to the end of the story. At this moment in Cutter's life, he's been manipulated by Angier into letting Borden hang, but has made amends with Borden in an effort to return his daughter to him. He also knows that Borden has killed Angier. The second scene shows an audience at a theater and introduces us to a bearded man, with a gloved hand, watching a magic show. He tentatively raises this hand into the air, and an assistant picks him out of the crowd. Over top of this, Cutter is talking about the first stage of a magic trick,
The pledge.
in which the magician shows an object and pledges to you its utter normalcy. Since the screenplay, as of the first page, has yet to reveal the bearded man as Borden, it's as though the script itself is setting us up for its own magic trick. The scene continues into the second page, introducing us to Angier standing beneath a large and complex electrical machine. Angier guides the bearded Borden and others to the machine as Cutter continues to describe the pledge. As the scene changes ever so slightly to Borden revealing himself to a stagehand, the image is coupled with this important thematic line.
You see, is it real? Yeah, I know. No. But of course, it probably isn't.
What is real and what is a lie? Magicians use deception, misdirection, and sleight of hand to distract their audience from questioning how they perform their tricks. This secrecy is at the very heart of the film. Coupled with our duplicate symbolism, further lends credibility to the idea of a double life. There's a quick beat here for Cutter which serves a secondary purpose. As the stagehand watches Borden go backstage, Cutter asks, "Who was that?" This is the first instance we are being told that the movie isn't in order, since Cutter was just somewhere else, as is Nolan's MO. Back on stage, Angier turns to his machine as it sparks to life. The script describes him as entranced and possessed, which are appropriate terms since Angier will actually be our chief character throughout the film, and obsession is his fatal flaw. We rejoin Borden backstage as he meets a blind stagehand. This character only gets one line throughout the entire film,
Who's there?
but he is also important to the story, though we won't discover why until much later. He's blind, so he can't see the many Angier duplicates that have drowned at his shows. Personally, I also always thought that Angier had cloned this one guy a couple of times just to have a group of stagehands, as we see them later on and they look remarkably similar. We briefly return to the workshop, where Cutter puts the canary into the birdcage on a tabletop. This time he begins talking about the next act of a magic trick. The magician takes the ordinary something and makes it do something extraordinary. In the foreword for Nolan's paperback screenplay for Inception, he addressed a popular theory about the principal characters representing different jobs on a film set, saying that it wasn't necessarily conscious, but that he wrote what he knew about. I like to think that The Prestige follows a similar idea, since the three stages of a magic trick sound very much like a simplified act breakdown. Act 1 is the ordinary world of the ordinary character. Act 2 pulls them into an extraordinary world, and Act 3 brings them back to the ordinary world, having gone through a transformation. It might not really be relevant to the film overall, but it's a cool detail nonetheless. Backstage, Borden arrives at a tank filled with water. The best thing about good mystery movies is that everything we see is important to the overall narrative, and this tank is no exception. By the end of this sequence, we will see that it serves a morbid purpose, but we also learn that it has a morbid history. Angier's wife Julia drowned in such a tank when Borden failed to tie a wet knot. This is what ultimately drove the two magicians apart. Back in the workshop, Cutter covers the cage with a cloth. If it wasn't obvious by now, this reveals fully that Cutter is also something of a magician himself. Suddenly, in relation to our theme of secrecy, he becomes another deceiver, thus provoking the question, can we trust him? In the other scene, Angier is enveloped by electricity and a body falls into the tank of water. Over top of this, we get probably the most important line of dialogue in the whole film. Now you're looking for the secret, but you won't find it because of course you're not really looking. You don't really want to know.
Want to be fooled.
Tying us back to our themes of secrecy and deception, both are a two-way street. There needs to be a deceiver and someone being deceived. Like special and visual effects, magic is one of the few lies that people are ready and willing to believe. In this case, people want to be lied to because it allows them to accept the illusion and enhance the enjoyment of the art. But the reason this line is important is because before we've even gotten to the inciting incident, before even the 5-minute mark, before we even know what the mystery is, we are told that the answer is going to be obvious, but we won't want to accept it. After they've first seen Borden's transported man, Angier and Cutter are discussing how the trick is done. Cutter suggests that it's merely a double. Angier refuses this, insisting that it's too simple, too easy.
You only say that because you don't know the method. It's a double that comes out at the end. It's the only way.
Because we spend most of the movie following Angier and thus connect with him, we want him to be right. We want the solution to be complex, but it ends up being delightfully simple.
But you wouldn't clap yet, because making something disappear isn't enough. You have to bring it back.
Even this line of dialogue is foreshadowing the ending. This scene between Cutter and Jess plays out again in the denouement, but with an added twist. Her father has gotten out of prison and has come to take her home. Cutter helped Angier make Borden disappear and then helped bring him back. Simultaneously, Angier is revealed to be the one who fell into the tank but is locked inside. Borden tries to help him, but it cuts to black. Cutter closes his dialogue by calling the third act of the magic trick
The Prestige.
A prosecutor repeats this line to him, followed by a line about Cutter being employed by Robert Angier, aka the Great Danton. Under normal circumstances, we could probably chalk this up to being cheap exposition, but since it's spoken by a lawyer, it's basically just confirming who's speaking for the record. Cutter tells the prosecutor that something had gone wrong that night. This is another recurring idea throughout the film. Tricks going wrong. Julia dies in a water tank, Borden loses his fingers in a botched bullet catch, Angier gets professionally embarrassed on multiple occasions.
Because exact science, Mr. Angier, is not an exact science.
For most of page 5, we just get dialogue from Cutter and the prosecutor. In the film, the only exposition we get is what an engineer is.
I'm an engineer. I design illusions and construct the apparatus necessary for performing them.
But the script tells us how long he worked for Angier, then begins asking about the water tank's relevance to a trick called the real transported man. Then we see Borden in chains. The script tells us that he's missing 2.5 fingers, but even that foreshadows a key line of dialogue later in the film.
We each had half of a full life.
Now, if you count the thumb as a finger, that means he lost half of his hand. And since we know that the Borden twins mutilated themselves after their accident, this further shows their character, even if we're not aware of it at the time. Thus far, in this scene, we have been told that Angier is dead, Cutter is a witness, and that Borden is the one who killed him. If we reapply our theme of deception, these three statements are probably not as concrete as we think. Angier is still alive, Cutter isn't just a witness, and Borden is a scapegoat and a red herring. For the most part, page 6 only serves to continue the courtroom scene. Aside from Cutter's brief joke,
He's a magician, ask him.
he only tells us the meaning behind the infamous idiom, a magician never reveals his secrets. Because if he reveals the procedure behind the trick, then everyone will know how it's done, and no one will be able to employ him due to his loose lips. Borden will repeat a variation of this later in the movie, although earlier in the timeline, so we understand their motivations from this line alone. There is a line in the film that isn't present on the script.
How then can we know that the tank wasn't simply some part of the trick that went wrong?
The tank is part of Angier's true illusion, framing Borden for his murder. The judge offers Cutter a compromise, and we come to the true importance of this page, Jess. Borden waves to her, and she waves back. With nothing more than a simple wave, we understand what price Borden will have to pay for his life of deception. On page 7, we meet a bit player, Owen, who speaks with a guard who mocks Borden's profession, albeit in a way that shows just how prestigious a magician he is. He's being chained up because the warden thinks he'll try to escape if he isn't.
Check the locks. Twice.
Funny thing is, in a way, he does escape, just not in a literal sense. Owens is a lawyer representing a Lord Caldlow, an accomplished amateur magician. I draw your attention to this line for one purpose. Lord Caldlow is Robert Angier, who will, during the third act, reveal to Borden that he felt
You always were the better magician. We both know that.
It's an interesting bit of subtle humility for Angier's character. On page 8, Borden cuts to the chase and asks Owen how much Caldlow will pay for his tricks. While Owens admits that Fallon will sell him all but the transported man, Borden says,
Well, I won't forgive myself for selling my greatest trick.
This line does echo Cutter's line,
I have the right to sell it on. If I reveal the method here, then the trick is worthless.
further cementing his professional stakes. However, since that doesn't further Owen's goals, he brings up that Jess will likely be removed from Fallon's care should Borden be executed.
Consider your daughter.
He offers to have her be Caldlow's ward. Even though Angier is letting Borden die, I do like that he isn't so cutthroat that he would deliberately destroy Jess's life in spite of that. In a strange parallel, Owens bequeaths Angier's journal to Borden. After a tense moment in which Borden insists
You never learn my trick.
he returns to his cell and begins reading the journal. Then we, after 9 pages, hear Angier speak, and wouldn't you know it, it's also an important line.
A cipher. An enigma.
Aside from Angier talking about trying to solve how Borden did his trick, this line also finalizes what kind of movie this is going to be. A mystery. Not just a mystery for the characters to solve, but one for the audience. This page wraps up showing us the visual of Angier's diary. He's on a train trying to decode a journal. It's worth noting that the script calls for the journal to be done in meaningless combinations, literally calling it gibberish. This is very telling since we later learn this diary is meant as a red herring for Angier to follow on a wild goose chase. Thus far, the script has given no true indication of which time period the movie is set in. For the most part, it could have been transpiring in any period, until about halfway through this page. Angier is in disbelief that the whole town has electricity. We can thus conclude that electricity is fairly new and hasn't been implemented on a grand scale yet, therefore late 1800s. The most important line of Angier's character technically takes place on page 11, but the scene does start on this page, so I'm going to include it. The hotel concierge asks Angier how long he'll be staying there. Angier's reply?
As long as it takes.
We now understand that this character is driven and determined to solve this mystery, even though we are still in the darkness about what the true mystery is. Though the best and most memorable parts of a movie are not usually found in the beginning of it, The Prestige proves that they can still be some of the most telling. By the end of these Fable pages, we understand who the main characters are, the several themes and motifs that are at play, the tone and type of story we're about to watch, and how the story is going to be told. Most importantly, at least for this movie, there are many clues and puzzle pieces that have been dangled in front of us that solve the mystery, even if we don't realize it at the time. The film has even set up more questions for us to ponder during our viewing, leaving us with the ever-looming question in our minds, what is true and what is a lie? So,
Are you watching closely?